Hey, salut! Comment allez-vous? Aujourd'hui, nous recevons un super invité, Luis Loza, développeur du jeu de rôle Pathfinder. La première édition de ce jeu de rôle a été publiée par la maison d'édition Paizo en 2009 et la deuxième édition a connu un succès mondial en 2019. C'est un honneur pour moi de vous présenter cet entretien en collaboration avec mon ami Albert, nouveau collaborateur de Média du jeu. L'entrevue va se dérouler en anglais puisque le développeur est anglophone. Il habite aux États-Unis, dans l'État de l'Indiana. Alors, souhaitons la bienvenue à nos amis. Hi, how are you, Lewis?
Comme c'est comme ça.
Comme c'est comme ça.
I'm doing well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Albert, on le voit en belle photo en bas. Là. Comment vas-tu, Albert?
Super bien, merci beaucoup Valérie. Et j'aimerais préciser que Louis est à Seattle.
Ah, Seattle! Ah! Désolé, excusez-moi. On a parlé d'Indiana tantôt, juste avant, puis là, je pense qu'il était à Indiana, excusez-moi. So, how do you play Pathfinder, the second edition?
How do you play Pathfinder? Oh, there's a lot of different ways. I think the easiest thing you can do, we have a special product called our beginner box. It's got everything you need to learn the game. It comes with all the basic rules. It comes with an adventure. It comes with pre-built characters. It comes with pretty detailed instructions on every step along the way of how to play the game. So if you want to start jumping into Pathfinder right now, I'd say go buy the beginner box. Otherwise, there's a bunch of different products you can get from us over at Paizo. You can grab our core rule book. That's our main rules. We also offer a lot of our rules online for free through our partner Archives of Nethys, and you can go on there to check out the rules if you like. Yeah, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. And, it's very easy. You can also do a search on YouTube or somewhere for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, how to play, and a lot of other people have done a lot of great work with helping teach new players on that. So, or you can just ask me. I'll run a game for you. I'll try to teach you the game too.
Okay, we just going to see the a video just for make sure everybody know the check it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a hero inside every one of us, with a fantastic legend waiting to be told. Is your hero a ranger with a loyal dinosaur companion? A druid able to take on the form of fearsome beasts? A champion sworn to redeem all evildoers or slay those souls that can't be saved? A graceful bard who performs magical dances? All these characters and more are possible with the Pathfinder role-playing game. Your gateway to adventure, danger, and magic. And making your character is as easy as ABC. Just choose from 6 fantasy ancestries, including dwarf, elf, and goblin. Select a background like acrobat, gladiator, or tinker, and then select one of 12 iconic classes, including the alchemist, barbarian, fighter, monk, rogue, and wizard. These 3 choices alone unlock more than 75,000 unique characters. Hundreds of feats and spells allow you to further customize your character, allowing you to make meaningful customization choices as you level up. And the treasures you find in your adventures will unlock even more fantastic abilities. Whether you're looking to create your own world or want to explore the vast and detailed Age of Lost Omens, the Pathfinder role-playing game is supplemented by monthly releases to help you bring your tales of heroism and intrigue to life, including adventures designed to fill a single evening or stretch into years-long campaigns. Unleash your hero with the Pathfinder role-playing game today.
Wow, that's really interesting stuff. Yeah. So the beginner box has been celebrated as the most accessible entry point for beginner into Pathfinder 2nd. Can you talk about how Paizo made it easy for players to learn the rule as they play?
Yeah, if you check out our beginner box, when you open it up, it'll have a lot of different information in there. It'll have, um, luckily, it starts with a nice little first page that just says, if this is your first time playing, here's what you should do. If you're playing alone, it has an adventure that you can read through just on your own. You don't have anyone else to play with. It still comes with the dice and everything you need to play a solo adventure. But if you're with the group, it'll say one of you is going to be running the game, one of you is going to be the game master. Grab this book. The others are the players. Grab these character sheets, open them up, and start reading it. And the the game master book takes you through a longer adventure, and each encounter, each room that you go through teaches you a new thing about the game. So the first time you'll learn about combat a little bit, then you'll learn about skills and searching around, things like that. So you'll learn every part of the game, but just a little bit at a time. You'll start adding a bit more as you go on, and hopefully by the end of it, you have a pretty good understanding of how the game plays, and you could play it on your own at that point if you really wanted to, with just the stuff that comes with the beginner box.
Hmm. How do you make meaningful design decisions while keeping the game from becoming too complex as it grows?
So what we do is we have a lot of character options. You have classes, you have your ancestry, you have your background, you have feats that you can take, you have magic items that you collect. There's a lot of different things, but we try to make sure that that only happens around the time that you level up. When you level up is when you take a new class feat, a couple of new options. So you learn what you start with, your starting character. You have a couple of different choices you make, and from there you get a lot of time to play with that character and understand that character pretty well before you level up. Add a few more choices and organically understand the character as they grow. Not necessarily more complex, but they have more depth to them. They have a lot more options, a lot more that they can do. So we start you off slow and slowly add more and more options. So you have a lot of fun things that you can do by the time you're a really powerful, well known adventurer.
Hmm. Hmm. Is it easier for you to develop rules or to write lore for the setting, and that are common writing pitfalls for each one?
Okay. I think I have an easier time with lore just because with lore, you don't have to worry about balancing anything or having the exact correct numbers. You can just create a story, right? You might sometimes have to connect it to existing material. So if it talks about an ancient king, you need to make sure you have the right name and have the correct dates on when the king was around and things like that. But beyond that, you can kind of just tell the stories that you want, and it's generally just prose. It's normal writing like anything else, as opposed to mechanics writing. But mechanics is really fun. I really enjoy the challenge that comes with coming up with an idea and then representing that as rules for the game, coming up with how that might affect your character or might affect the battlefield when you're in combat, things like that. So there's a lot of interesting quirks that come with writing mechanics that can be really fun and really satisfying at the end of it. I think some pitfalls to run into is realizing that when you're creating lore for a world that's meant to be played in, like a Pathfinder or a different RPG, you don't want to provide so much detail that there's no reason to explore, right? If we say there's a lost temple over there, and someone can go explore it, you don't want to say every single thing that's in the temple. The idea is to provide enough mystery to want to go in there and let your group or other groups decide what's in there. Sometimes you do have to provide more details, but even if you give the entire map of the temple and say, here's all the monsters that are in it, there's still opportunities to create mystery and opportunities for groups to come up with their own ideas. So don't get caught up in answering every single question. Make sure you provide some space for other people to come up with their own ideas and that stuff. And then the difficulties that come with mechanics, it comes with just the fact that there's a lot of mechanics already in the game, and sometimes it's very easy to come up with a fun idea and realize, oh, that's already in Pathfinder. Someone else already wrote it. So you want to make sure that you don't have to necessarily be original, but you don't want to retread old ground. If there's something that already exists, maybe you can come up with a way to make that more exciting, an improvement to that, or add on to that, or maybe take part of that idea and then add something else to make it unique. So try to make sure you don't retread old ground, and try to make sure there's enough room for players and GMs to come up with their own fun.
Hmm. How long is the development cycle for a Lost Omens book or a rule book from assignment to release date?
Okay, so at this point, it's close to about a year and a half from
Okay.
the day that we decide we're going to do this book to when it's finally in your hands and you can play it at home. So, in brief, we first come up with the idea that we want, and then we work internally to figure out, okay, what can go into the book. So, for example, one of our books was Gods and Magic, one of our early books. It's a book all about gods and different faiths and things like that. What happens when you worship a god, different abilities you can get from that. So that we had decided that's going to be a book. And the first couple of weeks we spent working internally, talking about what gods do we want to see, what powers do we want to give players, what kind of other stuff goes in that book. And there's a lot of ideas and brainstorming and figuring out what can go in the book. Then we write an outline, and then from the outline, we'd go talk to our authors. We use a lot of freelance writers. We say, hey, would you like to write this book? Here's what's going to be in it. And they say, yeah, I'd like that. I'd like to write that. I want to write this part and that part. So we get everyone on to the team once we have all of the parts of the book ready to be written. And we wait a couple of months while they write that. Then it comes back to us. We take the written material, we edit it, we develop it, we tweak the rules, we change it as necessary to make sure it works for balance and continuity for the world and things like that. Then it goes to our editing team, who does a big editing pass, which does all of that plus more. They also, of course, do proofreading, but they do accessibility and readability and sensitivity, a lot of other amazing things that the editors do. Then it goes to our art team. It gets laid out, and then it comes back to us to make sure it looks good. And then once it looks good, we do our final approvals, and then it goes off to be printed, and that takes a couple of months before it arrives on the store shelves. But like I said, at this point, it's about a year and a half to go through that entire process. And it's not just one book at a time. I'm actually working on 3 or 4 books at the same time. So I might just start a new book today,
Okay.
but tomorrow, once that's all ready to go, I have to go back and do the development on another book, and then also go look at the art for another book, and then get ready to approve the final book or something like that. They're all in different stages. And we're always constantly moving between several books at a time.
So you can keep your inspiration inside you when you finish a book and you begin another one.
There's a lot of times where
you
we'll
manage
get ideas.
two inspiring book.
We get a lot of the times we get ideas as we're working on another book that we can immediately turn around on a new book and start putting those new ideas into that.
Okay.
But also there's a lot of keeping track. Okay, well, this book has monsters. I got to make sure I remember this thing about monsters. This book has dwarves. I got to remember the stuff about the dwarves, and keeping track of a lot of different things at a
Wow.
lot of different times.
You're multitask.
Yes, a lot of multitasking.
Yeah, nice. So let's move on the story now. Who is your favorite living villain on Galarian?
Oh, living villain on Galarian. So there's a lot of different ones that I like. I'm currently partial to there's Queen Abigail Thrune. She is the queen of a nation called Cheliax. Cheliax is pretty evil. There's a lot of evil stuff going on, and the rulers of that country are currently in leagues with devils. They have a contract with Asmodeus, the head devil of our setting, that says, hey, we'll help you rule if you give us part of that power. Right? And there's a big contract, and there's a lot of stuff going on. And in the first edition, there was a couple of adventures that dealt with Queen Abigail. And it just kind of seemed like, oh, well, they won, the heroes won. That's the end of Queen Abigail. No, she's still there. And I think she's plotting a lot of fun stuff. Fun, I say fun. She's plotting a lot of interesting things. And I think there's exciting potential there. There's been a lot of villains that in our other adventures, they show up and then the heroes defeat them and then they're gone. They get killed or they get sent away or whatever, but they're no longer around. But Queen Abigail is a villain that was around, but no one ever faced her directly. And she has faced some losses. She has had some setbacks here and there, but she hasn't been outright defeated. So I think it's interesting to see a villain that is kind of a little bit, had some tough times, but now is maybe going to recuperate and then come back even stronger and see what happens with that. So that's one thing I'm excited for. And then there's also some other exciting things, like some of our big monsters are really fun. We had a book called Monsters of Myth, which just had a lot of really strong, powerful monsters, like Krampus, who's pretty fun around this time of the year. He's pretty evil. We had a big dragon called Fafnir, who's like a level 24 dragon, which is really interesting. There's a lot of fun stories with these monsters too, but I think of the non-monster villains, I think Queen Abigail is the one I'm most interested in at the moment.
That is really interesting. So we have all seen sadistic serial killer, greedy corporate types, and power mongering egomaniac depicted in media. How do you write nuanced villain and make sure you're not writing the same type of villain over and over again?
I think on one hand, it's okay if you take a lot of the same ideas for other villains, right? There's only so many stories. You can't come up with an original character every single time. That's really difficult. But I think what you do is you take something like an evil queen or a powerful wizard or something like that, and then give them an interesting twist. Maybe they have a really interesting backstory, like they used to be good and there was some kind of corrupting element. Maybe a demon got to them and twisted their values, or maybe that they decided that they're still doing good and that their approach just happens to be particularly evil. That's the thing that happened with Thanos in the Marvel movies. He thought he was doing good, but it was very evil what he was doing, or things like that. Or what's nice about Pathfinder and other RPGs is, unlike a movie or a TV show where you just write the character and present them on screen, you can have a lot of interesting mechanics to give them something new. So if there is an evil wizard, we can give them a new set of spells that no one has ever seen before, or a new type of magic that no one's ever seen before. And that makes them interesting. They're just like any other evil wizard, except that they can do this power or this magic that no one has ever seen before. And that gives them suddenly just an interesting wrinkle. That's what makes them that sets them apart from other wizards. So I think that's the way to go. And the other thing you can do is just have different people write the villains, right? We don't have the same people writing our adventures every single time. We use different authors, different genders and different backgrounds and different cultures and things like that. So each of them have their own idea of what could make a cool villain. And that's right. What they think is cool is definitely cool. And everyone has their own take, their own ideas. And it presents new villains every single time when we have someone else write them. So I think changing up who's presenting your villains can do a lot for keeping them fresh and keeping them original. It gives new ideas every single time when you do that.
No, that's great. So, are there any real world message or value that the creators are trying to communicate in the game?
Yeah, absolutely. We want Pathfinder to be inclusive. We want Pathfinder to be for anyone, regardless of gender identity, sexuality, sexual orientation, your upbringing, your culture, your skin color, anything like that. We want this game to be for everyone. We try to make sure the characters that you see in the game, the NPCs that you meet, and the other adventurers, even the villains that you see, are all of diverse backgrounds and different characters, to just let you know that, hey, whoever you are in the real world, that you can still be a hero in our world. We want you to come be heroes. We want you to come be excited. So it's never been a secret that Paizo, from the beginning, from the very first issue of Pathfinder, has been trying to be inclusive and make the game open for anyone. And that's still true. We have a lot of people internally at Paizo that are queer, that are different cultures, that are people of color, things like that, that are trying to make sure the game is expanding and bringing in as many people as possible. So one thing is, Paizo is going to say Pathfinder and Starfinder, our other game, is inclusive to anyone. Come on and play our games. And then personally, I think I'm slowly trying to get the idea of like, hey, the environment is important. So some environmentalist ideas might start coming through more and more. as time goes on, just because I can't go out and spend. I don't have $10 million to go plant a billion trees, but I can at least try to put some ideas here and hopefully inspire more people to try to take care of the world. Because eventually, if there's no world, there's not going to be any Pathfinder, and you're not going to have any more games to play.
Yeah, that's right. And Paizo plant some tree for
I
each
don't think we have
book?
any initiatives yet, but we definitely have been working with a lot of other partners that are trying to have those similar values. But I think that's actually a great idea. Now that you mention it, I wonder if I can maybe ask some people at the company to see what we can do to maybe push for that. A bit more of an environmentalist message. Again, that's my idea that I want to put forth. Maybe I can spread the idea to the rest of Paizo so we can do more of that.
Okay. Now I will present my new collaborator, Albert. How are you?
Oh, I'm well. Thank you so much for inviting me to the show, Valerie, and
Oh, that's a
welcome to the
pleasure for
show,
me.
Louis. We're
Yeah,
happy
thanks
to
so
have you
much.
on Média du Jeu. The next rulebook, Treasure Vault, is coming out in February. The premise of the
Yes.
book is a kobold is
Uh-huh.
presenting the wondrous items, weapons, and treasure belonging to an imperial dragon.
Yes.
And these dragons are mostly found in Pathfinder's version of Asia called Tianxia.
Tianxia,
Will Treasure Vault let the readers get a preview of the Tianxia continent?
Not really. I wish we could, but Treasure Vault is more just presenting as much equipment and magic items and treasure as possible. So there's not much space for anything beyond that. There's a couple of pages here and there where you get to read the kobold's writings to this dragon and get a fun little story along the way. But for the most part, it's treasure, it's weapons, it's armor. There will be stuff that would be like there's going to be new weapons and armor that are inspired by the same cultures that inspire Tianxia. So you're going to see some weapons that maybe draw from real world Japanese weapons or Chinese weapons and things like that. But there's not going to be there's not really any lore info or setting info in Treasure Vault. It's all treasure, all equipment. Um, but I think as we get a chance, we keep trying to put more and more information about Tianxia. I mentioned that Monsters and Myth book, which featured a monster or two from Tianxia. So we put in glimpses here and there where we get a good chance to do so.
I had to ask you that as the first question because I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of fans that are looking forward to seeing that world.
Oh,
So,
I know, for real. At the moment we have more stuff about Tianxia to announce. I promise it'll be very loud, and we want to make sure everyone hears it. But for the moment, nothing that we currently have on the schedules touching Tianxia.
and a follow-up to that, if you were to expand the map of Galarian in the
Mm-hmm.
Lost Omens line, would Tianxia or Southern Garand or another area be next on the list for you personally?
Oh, if I had a choice, I would probably. I mean, I see what you're doing here with asking me these questions, but if I had a choice, I would probably head west
To Arcadia.
towards Arcadia. But if someone said, "Hey, we have to go to Tianxia," I would be very happy to do that. If I didn't have a choice, it was just like, we're going to Tianxia, that's what we're going to do. I'd be like, yes, that's awesome. Or if, hey, we're going to go to the rest of Garoon, awesome. I love all of that. Anywhere we go in the world, I get excited for, even if it's still within the inner sea. If it's, hey, let's go to the Saga Lands, let's go look at Rissia again. Yes, that's great. I love the Pathfinder setting, and I get a chance to add more to this world that I love every day with the work I do. So even if we don't leave the normal part of the world, the inner sea region anymore, I think I'll still find something exciting to look at. But yes, of course, personally, I would go to Arcadia if given the chance.
I had a feeling you would say that. You have a new setting book coming out in March called Firebrands.
Yes.
Can you tell us about this faction and how powerful they are in comparison to the other factions in the game, like the Aspis Consortium or the Magambia Magical Academy?
So the Firebrands are actually probably our newest organization in the setting, at least within the Inner Sea region. The Firebrands didn't exist in Pathfinder until the start of second edition. So not until 2019 did the word Firebrands ever show up as like an organization in this capacity, at least. I think there's a group here and there that might be called Firebrand something or other, but this organization itself didn't exist until 2019. In our published books, we teased them very, very, very briefly in the core rulebook, and then we had our Lost Omens character guide, which expanded on them, and we're finally getting a chance to give them the big deep dive that gives you the full details on how this organization works. In the setting, we've said that they've been around for several years now, about 7 years at this point. But what they are is they originally started as a group of rebels. They're going around fighting tyranny and liberating people. They're fighting slavery and oppression and other things like that to try to keep people's freedoms intact. And that's what the Firebrands were. But what happened is at some point, and this is something I read in the book, some pirate decided, oh, I'm going to get up to no good, get into some trouble. And then he got into trouble. And when asked, hey, what were you doing? He's like, oh, I was working for the Firebrands trying to help some people. And they're like, oh, well, that's actually such a good cause. We believe in you. Sorry, we'll let you go. And that started this idea that you could pretend that you're a Firebrand and do whatever you want, and people loved you. And soon enough, people started saying, oh, I'm a Firebrand, and boasting and showboating and doing all these crazy stunts and things like that, and getting a lot of attention as a result. And at first, the original Firebrands, the rebels, were like, that's not us. What are you talking about? But soon they realized, oh, wait, while everyone's paying attention to all these people doing ridiculous stunts and wearing strange clothing and going all over the world for fun and adventure, they're not paying attention to us who are doing the rebellion thing. So the Firebrands accepted this other group of showboating Firebrands. And now there's this big organization who is all about personal liberty, whether it's because you want to go adventure and do things on your own or wear the clothes that you want, or whatever, have a thrilling life, or because you want to help protect other people's personal liberties by stopping tyranny, stuff like that. That's what the Firebrands are all about. And this book gives you insight into that history of the Firebrands, talks about a bunch of different factions within the organization, how to join the Firebrands, gives you new character options. If you're playing a Firebrand, you might be a swashbuckler, and that's a great class for that organization. And it'll give you new feats for that, new magic items, and it'll give you a lot of different locations in the world where Firebrands are currently active, and give you ideas for new campaigns and adventures to hopefully get people riled up either for fun or for rebellion.
For such a newly added organization, it's impressive that they were able to grow to thousands of members. If the Firebrands become too powerful as an international faction that is accountable to no one, is there a risk that they become viewed as the villains themselves instead of the saviors?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the book talks a little bit about the antagonists, the clashes they have with other factions. They get in trouble with local governments and things like that. So it's not a perfect role for the Firebrands, but also there's a bit of internal culling of people who try to take advantage of the Firebrand name. Like I said, you could just say you're a Firebrand and people assume that you're telling the truth. But if you start doing evil things or hurting people and saying, well, I'm a Firebrand, I can do what I want, everyone will by this point in the world, everyone recognizes, no, that's not what Firebrands do. You're just trying to take advantage of the Firebrand name. So local citizens might say, hey, stop it, and try to stop you, or even other Firebrands might come down on you to put an end to what you're doing. So Firebrands have been pretty good about keeping themselves in check for the most part with their actions and shenanigans.
So, Lewis, you mentioned one of your favorite villains being Abigail of the
Yes.
thrice damned House of Thrune,
Correct.
rulers of Cheliax. Can you tease how Cheliax will feature in the Firebrands book?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that Queen Abigail is doing is trying to get ahead of her opponents and her adversaries and things like that. So the Firebrands are not at all interested in trying to maintain the status quo in Cheliax. They see that Cheliax oppresses a lot of people. They use contracts and the like to put people into servitude. There's been mention in the past that there's slavery in Cheliax. That's a lot of problems, and that can bring a lot of problems with Firebrands coming in and disrupting the way of life in Cheliax. So in the Firebrands book, we actually take some time to look at what's happening in Cheliax. And the most recent thing you'll see there is that Queen Abigail recently liberated all the slaves. No, slavery is no longer a thing in Cheliax, which is interesting, which is unexpected. She's seems like she's doing it out of the goodness of her heart until you listen to what she's saying, or the things that actually came out of House Thrune, which says, okay, hey, slavery is over, and we want to protect and help all these people who are former slaves. We'll send out a goodness care package to all these people. Just sign on the dotted line. You'll get some money to help you out, get some clothes and stuff like that. Don't bother reading that contract. It's all about helping you out. But when you start looking into that contract, you realize that these people have now put themselves in a position where they can be conscripted to the army at any time on behalf of Cheliax, or they have to pay back this money that they're given at ridiculously high interest rates. So they're free of slavery, but they're suddenly put with a lot of different other problems that they have to deal with. So things aren't as good as Cheliax makes it seem to be, but it seems like Queen Abigail's maybe up to something with getting all these contracts out, and maybe why does she need a big army? Who knows? We'll see. I'm excited to see what ideas GMs come up with, or what stories we can tell in the future with a kind of shaken up Cheliax, but obviously still evil. It's still up to something that's no good.
Oh, that's a great scoop, Lewis, and it certainly moves us further in the story
Yeah.
of Galarian. So we're all excited to read about that. And while we're at getting scoops, there's been rumors on Reddit, Discord, and
Mhm.
Paizo forums about the last faction in the character guide that hasn't
Okay.
been given the book yet, the Hell
Yeah.
Knights. What's the relationship between the Hell Knights of the Order of the Scourge and the Firebrands like, and how do you reconcile such partnerships between the forces of chaos and the forces of order?
So there's that old saying, an enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And I think this is what's really happening is the Order of the Scourge is seeing that House Thrune is maybe doing things not by the book, and possibly there's corruption in the queen and her court, and the other aristocrats. And the Firebrands are also saying, hey, we want to stop uh, House Thrune and put an end to those. Maybe there's going to be a chance for them to work together, if only temporarily, right? Sometimes, if you got to follow things by the rules, if you're a Hell Knight, you maybe don't question if suddenly the Firebrands come in and do some trouble and stir up things for a bit before you decide to swoop in after them and be like, oh, hey, Firebrands, get out of here. Oh, by the way, look what they found. They found this incriminating evidence. Who would have guessed? Well, luckily we were here to grab that before the Firebrands ran off with it. So there's a lot of opportunities for interesting stories to make unlikely alliances in places there. So I'd love to expand on the Hell Knight story at some point. I think Hell Knights are at an interesting point where there's some potential to maybe even add new orders, or shake up the current orders just a bit to hopefully make them more interesting for players who don't just want to be lawful evil or lawful neutral. There's not many opportunities for lawful good, so I think there's a chance to add or expand on the Hell Knights as they are now, to really give them an interesting place in the world.
That sounds like the perfect elements for an adventure path, but I won't
Sure
ask you
does.
for any spoilers.
Well, I don't work on the adventure pass, so I wouldn't know at all what's happening with the adventure pass.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the Hell Knights then, very briefly?
Yeah. So the Hell Knights are, as we mentioned, the Firebrands are very chaotic. The Hell Knights are the opposite end of the spectrum. They're very lawful. They're all about following the rules and enforcing the law. And that's all well and good, right? It's important to maintain order and justice and things like that. But a lot of the Hell Knights have decided that the best way to follow order is to follow the oldest structure of order that seems to exist in the multiverse, which is hell. Hell is very ordered. There's 9 specific layers, and there are very specific rules about who's in charge, and then who's in charge below them, and things like that. And the Hell Knights decided that's what we're going to follow. Those are the hell is the people that we want to follow in terms of how we want to do things. So the Hell Knights happen to be very brutal about the ways that they enforce justice, and things like that. And then the Hell Knights themselves are broken down into further factions. Some are focused on stopping illegal spellcasting, or closing gates and rifts, planar gates and rifts. Some are dedicated to slaying monsters that threaten civilization. Some are dedicated to rescuing people who have been kidnapped, which is actually pretty good. Some are all about stopping people who are heretical to the Church of Asmodeus and things like that. So it's a lot of different ways that justice can be enforced, and a lot of it tends to be pretty nasty in the way that they do it. They don't have any scruples about, well, if they get hurt, but they shouldn't have been breaking the law anyway, so that's on them.
Why are there so many Hell Knight orders, and do you have plans for them to expand outside of Cheliax, like the Order of the Nail? Will they play a larger role in Galarian in the future?
There's a lot of Hell Knight orders, partially because if we give them each their own very specific niche, it makes for interesting stories, right? If you wanted to be a group that's all about rescuing kidnapped people, you can join the Order of the Torrent and do that, right? You can have a very specific story and build up and learn that particular faction in really interesting ways. It also suggests that there are some things that Hell Knights see as more important than others in terms of justice and law and things like that. So maybe, they don't really care about, I don't know, people not paying their taxes as much. They find other things more important, and that just gives them an interesting wrinkle as a faction, right? Why don't they care about tax fraud and things like that so much compared to rescuing kidnapped people or things like that? What's the story there? And as for expanding them, I have some ideas about how I'd love to see them shaking up. Of the 5 factions that we mentioned in the Lost Omens character guide, which is I think what you were alluding to earlier, we had the Firebrands, Knights of Lastfall, Magambia, Hell
Pathfinder
Knights,
Society.
and Pathfinder Society. Thank you. They're the ones that personally, uh, they're the bottom of my list in terms of like, oh, I find these other factions more exciting. Not to say I dislike the Hell Knights, but I would prefer to read other books first before the Hell Knights. But I think there are ways. I know a lot of people love the Hell Knights. I want to make sure we give them their their time in the spotlight when we get a chance for that. And I think there's also ways to expand that to make them both more interesting for people like me who want to see other things going on with the Hell Knights, but also to hopefully broaden the stories. They, like you mentioned, they're mostly contained to Cheliax, so getting them a reason to expand beyond Cheliax and maybe become more of a setting-wide faction and explain why they're so important would be really interesting. So I have some ideas for that. I'm hoping to maybe implement them in the future. We'll see how that takes form. That could be part of an adventure, teaming up with Firebrands or something, or it could be their own book, like with the Firebrands or the Pathfinder Society.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll have to figure out what happens with that, but I'm excited to see what happens in the future of the Hell Knight.
So to close this off, will we see a Hell Knight book before 2025?
I can't make any promises, but as you
A
mentioned,
lot more.
there are 3 books already. There are 3 books already, and there's only 2 factions left that don't have a book. The Magambia Academy and the Hell Knights don't have a book. So I'd love to get a book for each of those at some point before too long, because I have a lot of interesting thoughts on what we can do with both of those books in ways that I don't think people are expecting. There's a lot more to those. There's a lot to be added to those stories that can be really interesting, and a lot of really fun rules that could come with that as a result.
Very interesting, Louis. So you
Yeah.
mentioned the Magambia being another faction that
Yeah.
was heavily featured in one of the adventure paths. So maybe people weren't keen on you releasing a book on that since we just finished the adventure path. But where do you see the Magambia going?
Well, I don't want to make any spoilers for that adventure path, the Strength of Thousands adventure path, but I will say if you go through that adventure path, there's a lot of significant things that happens with the Magambia, and I think exploring what the Magambia looks like in the aftermath, what does the Magambia look like after Strength of Thousands, is got a lot. It's got a lot of interesting potential. So there's fun stuff to do, and also just the fact that even though we had Strength of Thousands, there wasn't a book dedicated to the Magambia. So I think there's still an opportunity to do that, to give you new options for the current archetypes, new spells, deep dives on each of the different branches of the school, and new opportunities for extra mechanics that I think would be pretty fun to do.
What's
Someday.
it like for you from a designer's perspective to sort of move the story forward from an adventure path that only recently came out, if you were to release a Magambia and it shows sort of
Mhm.
the aftermath, what is it like for you? Since not all everyone will have played the book
Mhm.
of
Strength of Thousand.
Strength of
Yeah.
Thousands yet, so maybe they're not caught up to read up on the Magambia faction book.
I think um, there reaches a point where we can't wait. Like if we wanted to, we could wait 10 years before we do a Magambia book to make sure that everyone has played Strength of Thousands if they wanted to. But I think there's a certain point where it doesn't really matter if you've played it or not. You either will have played it or know well enough and can avoid it for a little bit to finish up your adventure, your campaign, or you say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to read it. And a lot of it, what it is doesn't tell you what happens in Strength of Thousands. I'm going to use Rise of the Rune Lords as an example here. That was our very first adventure path for Pathfinder First Edition, which is now 15 years old, right? I think it's safe to say a couple of things about Rise of the Rune Lords without worrying so much about spoilers. At the end of it, you fight a Rune Lord Karzu, who's a big, powerful, evil wizard, and you defeat him. In Pathfinder Second Edition, we have assumed that adventure has already happened, and we say Karzug was defeated by heroes. That's all we say. We say he was defeated. We don't say who the heroes were. We don't say, well, first they started in the town of Sandpoint, then they went underground into the catacombs of Wrath, and then they went over to book 2 and then book 3. We don't give you all the full details of the adventure path along the way. We just say Karzug was defeated and maybe a couple of other details. So hopefully by the end, by the time, if we were to do a Magambia book, by that time I would hope that we could just say, here's some things that happen and here's how the Magambia has changed, but still be just enough information to be like, oh, that's interesting, I didn't know the Magambia had changed. Now I want to go live that. I want to be part of that story. I want to go see how that happened and inspire you to go play Strength of Thousands and live through those changes and exactly figure out how that all came to be. Because knowing the end point, it's the whole it's the journey, not the destination. We can tell you what happens at the end, but you still don't know all the fun stuff that comes along the way. You don't know all the characters you meet, all the interesting challenges, all the great treasure and locations that you'll visit. So there's a lot you can still do without really spoiling Strength of Thousands. There's going to be a couple of big spoilers if we were to do something like that, but it wouldn't, I think, completely ruin the campaign and prevent you from playing it.
And that makes the world of Pathfinder a very dynamic place because time moves at the same pace as the real world.
Yeah.
So we can see the consequences in the Lost Omen line of the outcomes that happened in the Adventure Path line.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it leads to interesting things as well. It gives us a chance to, not necessarily keep things changing, but change them when we feel it's right to change them, right? If we were to do the Magambia book, I think that book would is a much better book after Strength of Thousands than it would have been before Strength of Thousands, because there's so much that changes within the adventure that it might feel like, well, if I had a Magambia book before then, how much of that is still true? How much of that still applies after the adventure pass? So I think we can be very specific with our changes that way when we need to, and then the other ones we can, just bring them up here and there as is necessary, but not necessarily keep changing the world every single month, but just enough here and there to make it feel like it's something worth investing or keeping track of stuff. And if you don't, hey, then there's always a chance to go back and learn what happened.
Yeah. What are some ideas you're currently playing with, such as adding more battle maps to the Lost Omen setting books or adding deities with stat blocks, maybe?
I don't think we could do deities with stat blocks until we were to come up with a specific rule set to represent that. And I don't know if we would even want to do that. Deities, the moment you give them a stat block, a player is going to try to kill them, right? And maybe we don't want people killing our gods quite yet. But I think there are opportunities to take what we've learned in previous Lost Omens books and improve on them. The upcoming High Helm book, which is the one after the Firebrands book, is another city book like our Absalom book. But there's some things that I saw that were ways that we can improve on it, or people said after the fact, after they read the book, they said, oh, I wish it had this or that. And I thought, oh, there's ways I think we can implement that and improve that book. So there's always little things that we're doing to change. And then there's, just kind of big ideas that happen here and there. I don't think we would have done something like the Lost Omens Travel Guide in first edition, but I think we had enough ideas or information already out there on the world up through first edition and now to second edition that we finally felt like, oh, we have enough that we can just kind of have fun with it and explore things in ways that we haven't seen before. So I think finding all those different ways that we haven't touched on the world yet or presented the world always opens up new opportunities for us.
Oh, thank you. You have another rulebook coming out in August called Rage of the Elements. Are
Yes.
there any parts of Galarian that will be heavily featured in it, or is the focus completely on the elemental planes outside of Galarian?
There is a big focus on the elemental planes. I think there's parts here and there where it touches about how elemental influences affect Galarian. I couldn't tell you the full details on that. I wasn't a lead on that book. That's more of our designers. Logan Bonner was the lead on that book. So I know a little bit about that book. I understand that the Kineticist class is coming and some of the other material is coming. But I wish I knew a bit more to talk about some of the more exciting setting stuff that's happening. I know one thing we are doing for sure is providing deity rules for the elemental lords. So if you wanted to worship one of these gods, those will be in there and give you full details on the different elemental gods, so you can be a follower of one of them, which is something that we haven't had a chance to really dive into too much over the years. So this is our first big chance to do so, and I'm excited for people to see
From a
that.
lore perspective, do the elements align with any particular religions, factions, or nations, the way that devils are with Asmodeus and daemons aligned with Norgorber and so forth?
I don't think there's a direct match in a lot of cases. One thing you'll learn about in that book is that the classical elements, which is air, water, earth, fire, is not the full picture. And a lot of people in Galarian thought, oh, those are the 4 elements. But you learn that in Tianxia they had different elements, which is earth, water, fire, metal, and wood, which is also not the full picture. It turns out everyone on Galarian was wrong in their own different ways. So I think you'll be able to see like how these influences of what they thought what the elements were will have affected cultures and things like that. But there's nothing like a direct analog like with daemons or devils and stuff like that. There's always elementals, but none of them are so connected to a specific god or anything, other than maybe Gosre, who's our god of nature. But beyond that, there's not so much that you can say, oh yeah, with elementals they're always connected to this god or that god. Elementals are such a broad category that they can be connected to a lot of different gods, which means that they're usable by a lot of different gods. You can have fire elementals with Sarenrae, or you can have metal elementals with Gorum because they metal and armor and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different ways you can use them without feeling like you're
I think
restricted to only,
it's
one or two different stories.
I think we should stop there because
Okay.
we have another stream in 2 minutes.
Sure.
So it was really,
Okay.
No
really
problem.
interesting. Thank you very much.
I had one last
Yeah.
question, if you don't
Okay.
mind, Valerie.
No,
I
I
had
don't
one
mind.
last question. I just
Go.
wanted to know approximately when next year do you think we will learn about the next release after Rage of the Elements?
Oh, I think you'll learn about this within the next 2 or 3 months. For
Perfect.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Valerie. All yours.
Oh, that's a pleasure for me. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup tout le monde d'avoir été présent à cette belle entrevue anglaise. Ça va être disponible sur YouTube, Média du jeu. Et si vous avez apprécié ce contenu, allez me supporter sur ma page coffee.com/média du jeu. Thank you very much, Luis. Thank you very much, Albert.
Thank you.
Have a good
My pleasure.
Albert.
have a good evening.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Have a great night, everyone.